What would a professional first responder tell you to do to become more prepared? Today we're going to interview Nick Miller, who is a professional paramedic and teaches other paramedics how to do things. Now today you get to be trained. Hey, Provident Preppers, I'm Jonathan.
And I'm Kylene, and today we have an incredibly special treat for you. We have Nick Miller, who is a paramedic instructor and educator. He has a master's degree in safety, security, and emergency management. So Nick is somebody who really knows his stuff. And we were excited when he agreed to come on because I think that he can shed some wisdom and experience on all of this that could be very helpful for all of us.
And before we go any further, I want to say a big thank you to your entire community, all of our first responders who sometimes I think we take them for granted. It's kind of like water in the tap. We just always assume that it's there and they take care of us. And you guys put your lives on the line every day of your lives. You never know what's coming at you. And I want to say a big thank you for all that you do for your entire community and the way that you take care of us.
Me too. I absolutely agree. If there are only enough of you to go around, we wouldn't have to worry about doing this, but we need to be able to take care of ourselves. So speaking of which, Nick, my first question, we hear this all the time. I don't need to worry or prepare because the government will take care of us. Why is that faulty thinking?
Thank you for the kind words. Why is that faulty thinking? I just watched a Smithsonian channel on the Texas winter storms, and they said at one point half of the state of Texas was affected. So when you think about that, I don't think any agency on earth can amass that much amount of supplies and resources to deal with that over hundreds of miles. Historically, you look at large scale disasters. I grew up in the flood of '93 here in Missouri, and you look at Hurricane Katrina and all those things. The responses came, but they were a long time coming, and they were not quite what everyone thought they were going to be. So you are in control of your destiny and preparing and being ready for an event, and you get to decide how well you're prepared.
Because there really aren't. There's not enough manpower. There's not enough people. There's not enough resources.
And I think if people would take a minute to think about it, the amount of money, the amount of time and people it would take for any one of those, it's way too much. That's an unrealistic expectation. And I think in many cases, people say that the government's going to take care of it because they're not really interested in stepping up and doing it. But we all have that responsibility. And I think you would totally agree with that if we all stepped up, our world would go much better.
Absolutely. Those who prepare in advance have far less problems. And if there are problems, they have a plan and they know what they're doing about it.
So what specific situations would you recommend that we prepare both for ourselves and our neighbors?
I think the first thing is have a plan. When you don't have a plan, you're planning to fail. My wife's plan is to find me. And realistically, I liked your last guest because he kept saying, what if? Well, what if this happens to you? Because what happens to you is very different than what happens to me in Missouri. So have a plan, know what you're going to do. Just knowing what you're going to do, knowing where you're going to escape to, knowing what you're going to do if you run out of food, knowing what you're going to do if certain things happen. Knowing what you're going to do is the first step, because then you know what you need to get to accomplish that plan once you know what you're going to do.
So where could I go to look to find out? I know we all live in different places. We're Utah. You said you're Missouri. What kind of situations should we prepare for? I mean, here we're looking at earthquake, right?
Right.
But we don't have to worry about a hurricane. Where could we get some good information on what to, for our specific areas? Do you have any recommendations?
I would just say just get on the internet and start looking. I mean, if you grew up in Utah, you know your local hazards. I grew up in Missouri and I knew they were tornadoes and earthquakes. I know floods too. When I lived in Louisiana for 7 years, it was hurricane. That was the major one. So you already kind of have an idea, but there are certain generals. I mean, just look at your insurance policies on your house. They're all hazard categories. So you got to think about everything that happens. You have to think about security. You have to think about fire safety. You have to think about flooding. go through this. There's a lot of things. You could just even Google search emergency response plans and see some that pull up. And then from there, you can look at what corporations do and you can amend it to what you need to do.
And I think most states have a Department of Emergency Management for their state. And
Yep.
that's probably a great place to go. Maybe somebody's moving into a new area. That would be a great thing to just connect with that agency and see, okay, what is it that they're concerned about? Because that's what I should be concerned about.
Good mention. And every county has its own emergency management, usually agency as well. Most of those though are just being as optimistic as they realistically are. They'll say prepare a 72-hour kit, or essentially a bug out bag. But in reality, that's very short term. I think a lot of those guys are just hoping you guys do something. You mean the general population, but I would say they are the beginning. They are not the end.
One of the things that I think is really important in the communication aspect of all this is to find out, like for our local sheriff's department, they have a Facebook, they have different notifications that go out. There's a Nixle, so that we can get those alerts. But if you don't sign up for those alerts or you don't know where to go to get them, you're not going to be informed. And so that is one of the things that I think can be really helpful too.
Would be a really good first step.
And most iPhones, you can opt in to getting the alerts. I got an Amber Alert yesterday.
We always talk about being part of the solution and not part of the problem. So from your perspective as a first responder, what kinds of things do you want to see us do so that we are part of the solution and we're not adding to your workload and we're not being the problem?
I think the first thing is just listen to what is being broadcast on the news and radio. If it's flooding and they say evacuate, evacuate. If it is snowing and they say don't drive on the roads, don't drive on the roads. Because during those bad weather, EMS and fire are already pushed to the max. And now you might find yourself in a very, very long wait. So that would be the other thing. Another thing is, imagine you're in the shoes of the first responders. Drive up your house at dark and see if they can find it easily. I can't tell you how many times I've been out with all the lights on my ambulance and with a spotlight trying to find a numeric address to know that I'm in the right place. Know what your cross street is. When you're in the house, make sure that there's pathways that paramedics can get in, safely move around. I've been in houses where they had curio cabinets in the middle of a narrow hallway. And I have to go through this to the bedroom, and I'm just going to try to bring a large guy out in a stretcher. Now that whole curio cabinet has to be moved, and all those precious mementos are at risk of being damaged. So, imagine it from the other point of view. And also just know your first responder agencies. Like I live in a very well-funded area with the fire district provides the EMS as well. I know the nearest firehouse is less than 2 minutes from my house. If that one's out, I know the nearest ambulance is 6 minutes from my house. If that one's out, it goes to 10 minutes. So I know what's in your area. No other training. There's a huge difference in training between an EMT and a paramedic. Do you have EMTs, what they call basic life support, and paramedics are advanced life support? Who's coming for you? Because it makes a big difference if you have a chest pain or if you're in cardiac arrest, who you get. So, and the same thing with fire. If you're in a volunteer agency or a paid agency, are they trained? If they're volunteer, what is the response time? Do you have hydrants? All these things are going to make a difference, because I can tell you, so many people, their only idea of what happens with public safety is what they watched on TV. And that is a very not accurate description. And they'll get upset because they expect you to do something in advance. And when you don't do it, they get upset. So the more you know and understand what happens in real life will help you better prepare, God forbid, should you need those people on that day.
Great advice. You talked a little bit about where you start, developing a plan. Don't want to get into too much detail here, but do you have like a 2, 3, and 4 that you could share with us also? Okay, you get a plan kind of, and probably concurrently while you're building that plan, are there some things that people can do to take some first steps?
I think the first thing people realize is time's on your side when you're prepping. Disasters don't happen every day. You have months, sometimes years, to get your ducks in a row. You just have to allocate a certain amount of time every day to say, okay, I'm going to work on this today. and it never ends. It's a process, and you're never going to be perfect at it. There's things I wish I could have. There's things I know I should do, but I have to go to work or whatever. But every day you get a little better. Every day you tackle a certain thing, you know. How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. So don't let it overwhelm you, you know. And then from there, you know, do your research. So pick one. Like, so let's say I would recommend starting in concentric rings of time. Because really what prepping gives us is time to resolve an issue safely. So I would start with my 72-hour kit that the federal government wants you to have. Once you've got 72 hours of food, shelter, supplies, you know, now let's expand out to a week. Now let's expand out to a month. Now let's expand out to a quarter until you get to that 15 months. That would be, to me, the minimum ideal that you can handle something happening for at least 15 months would be ideal. Again, there's also a certain limit. You know, do it the best you can within your finances, do it the best you can within the size of your house. You know, I'm at the point now where I need more storage. I'm looking at houses for storage now, not based on bedrooms. It's a process, but it doesn't have to be a terrible process. Even if you have just that 72-hour kit, which you can find easily on a website or a bug out bag, whatever they call it, you're better than 99% of the people.
You make a really, really good point there. And sometimes people get discouraged because it seems too big. And you made several good points there about taking small, steady steps. That's what we call it. Just keep making those small, steady steps, because every one of those steps puts you in a better place. And I liked what you said about buying time. And that's really what kind of the essence of a lot of this is it buys you time to figure out the problem and solve it. Great points. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, it's not even emergency sometimes. My coffee at Costco, I couldn't get for 9 months.
Wow.
So I had a year to figure it out. Luckily, it came back before I ran out. But I have to have my coffee, you know, first responder.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So I was about to, but it gave me time. If I knew it was never coming back, I can research what I'm going to replace it with. Again, it's that time thing, you know, but I didn't have to worry about it.
Okay, so as a man with an intimate knowledge of disasters and emergencies, this is what you do for a living, right? What have you done personally to prepare your family?
That's a good question. So I've done a lot of things. You know, a lot of it's just common sense. You know, I spent 5 years as a volunteer firefighter, so I make sure I have smoke alarms, smoke detectors, CO detectors. I make sure every room in my second floor has an escape ladder that you can buy at Home Depot. Not just one, every room, because you know, with fire traps, you know. My wife drives a long distance across a major river every day, so if there's the earthquake, she's not coming home quickly. So I make sure in every car we have what people call a bug out bag or a get home bag, and I make sure we have an automotive kit in case she breaks down or has a wreck, or all those things for the automotive safety and water, and just those things that you would need to have that. Some other things I would recommend is learn everything you can. I've developed a library over the years of different books on different topics of first response. As a paramedic instructor, I have a whole library just on paramedic clinical textbooks. So learn everything you can. It's much easier to improvise if you know what you're improvising versus trying to learn about first aid the first time on the sheet that's in the first aid kit. It also helps with the psychological and physiological responses to stress. When adrenaline shoots through your body, it cuts off your long-term memory and it cuts off your fine motor skills. So the more you train and the more you're prepared for that, the better chance you'll have of not eliciting that stress response because you're prepared, and the better chance you'll know what to do because you practiced it and you know what you're doing. But for my family, you know, we also do a lot of things. I make sure all the hallways are clear so paramedics can get in. I have on my mailbox, I have big reflective numbers so they can see it as they're driving forward. They're not gonna have to turn around and look. You know, I have I have an emergency station on every floor in my house with a first aid kit, a fire extinguisher, flashlights, whatever they need, so that they don't have to go far should something happen. So my biggest worry is I'm not there when something happens. I'm pretty comfortable with being there if something happens. That's what I would recommend as a start. And then the other thing I would recommend is make sure you have an all hazards plan. So many people focus on whatever interests them or whatever they're afraid of the most, or they'll shy away from whatever they're afraid of the most. Some people, all they want to do is prep for someone breaking in, and some people don't even want to think about it, you know, but you have to think about everything. Don't just think about food. You know, some people just want to stockpile food. Some people just want to deal with one or more areas. Have an all response plan. Say, what if my house burns down? What if I have to evacuate? What if I go to Walmart like 3 years ago and nothing's on the shelves? You know, just have that general plan, and then every day make it a little bit better.
Going along with that, we used to play this what if game with our kids. And it was a way to kind of bring them into the process, a way for them to learn to think, you know, and we'd just be wherever we were. Okay, what would you do if this happened right now? And it sounds like you've probably done some of that with your family, you know, kind of going through these thought processes, because, you know, sometimes this is scary for kids, but I think if we handle it in a straightforward way and make them a part of the process, I think it really helps to bring them into, you know, this is a good thing to do, and it brings them some security. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. As soon as my kid could talk, I made him memorize my phone number, my wife's phone number, and addresses. And he actually had to use it for the first time last week because grandma forgot to pick him up. So the other thing to do is when you have a problem, do an after action study. So that analysis, my son did the right thing. He called me and called mom. Problem was I didn't recognize the phone number and I was talking, so I didn't answer it. And my son did not leave a message.
Okay.
So we've learned from that, and we've expanded to, and leave a message. Tell me where you're at and what's going on in the message. Because literally, you know, I didn't realize it till my wife called me and goes, "Oh, we forgot this or something." And I'm like, "Oh, so that's what that number was." So, you know, when you do have a problem and you do have to call 911, the last thing I would say is, you know, evaluate what went right, what didn't go right. What can you learn from that?
That's a really, really great point. I think sometimes, you know, because things won't always go right, but there's a lot of learning that can take place, just as in that situation with your son. There's a lot of learning that can take place by things that didn't go completely right, and how are we going to do it better next time? Well done.
And that's one of the things we do in prepping a lot. As we practice, that's one of our big things, is that we aren't just book learners, we're hands-on doers, right? We want to learn, because every time we experiment and we live it, we learn something different. Like we did this challenge where we didn't go to the grocery store for 90 days. That was actually rough, but we found the holes that we had in our food storage. We found things, we learned so many things that we didn't anticipate. So the hands-on is really important. And speaking of the 90-day challenge, one of the things that you had mentioned in our conversation back and forth was about having a Walmart in your house. Tell us a little bit more about that.
So I've had the privilege of teaching EMS all over the country, and I was in New Mexico for several years. And one of the guys I worked with down there, he went on one of the task force to Katrina. And what he told me was, we took over a Walmart because everything we needed was there. They had gas, they had clothing, change of underwear, soap, bullets, everything they needed, car stuff, whole grocery store, pharmacy, everything was needed was in a Walmart. So, you know, that kind of rang a bell with me, like, wow. So, you know, my whole basement, you know, I have in my storeroom in my basement, it's like, well, I try to make a little mini Walmart. So what if, you know, like 3 years ago, I have pictures from 3 years ago of the local Costco, the local Walmarts and grocery stores empty, completely empty. And I didn't worry about it, you know, because I knew I had it downstairs, you know, and it's also nice. It's not even from prepping. It's nice when I had a cold 2 months ago and I could just walk downstairs and get a box of cough drops, and I don't have to drive to Walgreens with the sniffles, you know. You know, what are you going to eat? What are you going to do? So, and I would say that a lot of people who do store, they don't think beyond food. You got to think medicine, medical supplies, batteries. Think about anything you use for your light bulbs, you know, house filters for your HVAC, you know, just whatever you need. How long can you go? I mean, realistically, most people in a regular house can do 15 months, but after that, you're going to be really, you know, looking in every nook and cranny to find more room. So I think you have to set what I can realistically do. Now, did I build that overnight? No, I couldn't afford to do that. You know, I built it over, I guess, 5 or 6 years when I moved back to Missouri. So, but if you think about that way, the Walmart is where you're going to go for 99% of the things you need. And if you can have that for a period of time in your house, you're going to be in good shape. Like I just saw the pictures where people were waiting in lines from the Texas winter to get bottled water. They had an assembly line trying to pass out bottled water. I'm like, I don't have to sit in that line. I remember when they had the long lines in Costco out through the hallway. I look at it, the line was long. I'm like, no, I don't need to go. I come back later. So it gives you having that gives you a significant amount of freedom and peace of mind, you know. And I even got to learn some bartering skills. All the people forgot their toilet paper, so I would trade people who had eggs. They had chickens, but they didn't have toilet paper. So
That's awesome. I love that picture of just having everything, right? A backup for just about everything. What is the one scenario? There's all kinds of crazy things that can happen, but what is the one scenario that concerns you the most?
it's tough. I mean, from an actual real threat perspective, I would say anything with what they call CBRN, chemical, biological, nuclear radiation, whether it's a terrorist attack or this COVID pandemic or anything, because all those require a significant amount of specialty supplies. They can attack large areas, they can kill very quickly. And most people can't afford a bomb shelter or a CBRN suit or a PAPR respirator or things like that. So those are the things where you just have to pray to God that he protects us from those things. Those are the most difficult. I mean, after 9/11, we never thought about that stuff. Or prior to 9/11. After 9/11, I find myself one day in training to put a Tyvek soup on, tape it shut, put this respirator with this big screen and a positive PAPR, positive airway pressure respirator. And I'm supposed to provide medical care in this. I'm like, man, this thing's hot. It just totally, you know, now we were not prepared. I mean, suddenly we're upgrading all our radio supplies, 800 megahertz, and doing all these truncation systems and all that. So that to me, you know, the harder it is to do, the more you have to rely on prayer. So because some things you just have to accept, some things are just out of your hands. I guess that would be the most challenging of them all.
And I totally agree with you. You know, prayer, sometimes we don't think of that as being part of our prepper arsenal, right? And our preparedness arsenal. And it absolutely is. There is so much power in our ability to pray and to have faith and do everything that we can do and then trust God.
I'm not going to win every time on a cardiac arrest. I can do everything right and they're still going to die. And sometimes I can save lives, and sometimes I'd see people who should be dead, yet they're talking and walking. And I see the opposite, people who should be alive, yet they're not. And I just, you know, Meg explained to me, God wins every time. So that helps, you know, for me dealing with all the bad stuff in my career. It's really limited my PTSD from it, just having that faith personally.
I like that. I appreciate that. I think we very much relate to that. One of the last questions I wanted to ask is, you guys have expertise that's going to be needed, is needed in a lot of situations. You're leaving your families. What can we do to help you and your families get through this while you're out away from your family? That's probably got to be one of the worst feelings for a family, to be missing a member who's out making other people's lives better, but not able to be there to kind of make everything whole. And as neighbors and friends, I feel some obligation to help out, to step in and see what we can do. What are the things that could be done, say, for your family, that would bless your lives while you're out doing your job?
That's a great question. No one's ever asked me that before. No one's really thought about it. So I appreciate that. I mean, luckily, I'm not out in the field too much anymore. I do primarily teaching and hanging out at home. But, you know, when strike teams deploy, I mean, well, even on a normal day, a firefighter paramedic may be away from home 24 or 48 hours on his normal shift. You don't think that's a big deal until you realize you have kids and shift change and how's one going to school and who's going to make dinner, all those basic things, you know, when someone's on a shift. So when they're deployed on a strike team, like in the hurricanes, they may come all the way from Texas to help Louisiana for 2 weeks, or they might be coming from somewhere else. You know, if you know someone who's a paramedic or in your family or in your church, think about, make sure the little things, because now they might be a single mom and have no one, or they might have a family, but they still lost 50% of their people who can do free rides and all stuff. So just keep them in your thoughts. Like if you know, little things, dinner, helping them get a ride, kids to the school and back, just saying thank you for your service. Prior to COVID, I never saw that level of appreciation. Another thing you can do is also just call your local agencies and see what your people need. Especially in tax-based services, they'll be happy to answer the phone and answer that for you. I mean, I can't tell you how many times it's great. You walk in after a call and someone brought cookies. Like, now I got to get rid of them. But, but those go a long way. They really do.
Well, we really, really appreciate our first responders. And I know that I really struggled when the police force was taking such heat, right? Because I'm like, you guys, you are out there going above and beyond. And I recognize that not everybody is perfect and not everybody is doing everything right. But wow, I am grateful every day that we live and we have people to come and to help us. And so we're super grateful for that. And okay, back to community. These guys can't do it on their own. We have to do everything that we can so that they can do their job, right? And if they don't have to worry about my family because, we're doing what we can and we're taking care of our next door neighbor or our elderly neighbor or whatever, all of us working together, we can definitely do something amazing and we can get through anything. I really believe that, but it takes all of us. So, Nick, do you have any final words for us?
Yeah, just along that line, one thing I also want to mention is make sure that if you want your police and fire and EMS to be there, that you support them. A lot of these places that have defunded the police are now struggling to retain police officers. And even just on the politics aside, just even fire and EMS, most people don't realize that paramedics have to go to 2 to 4 years of school. They're higher trained than an RN, and many, at that level, the associate or bachelor's level. That takes a significant investment on their part, and they need that money. And a lot of these guys can't even make enough money to raise their kids. They're working 2 and 3 jobs. So these guys are going to leave. They're leaving in droves. The days of volunteerism is really over because it's become so specialized. A lot of people don't realize that fire truck that comes down your street is $1 million. That ambulance that drives down your street is $250,000. And that's not including every single thing in there. Every single thing in that truck costs thousands of dollars. The stretcher costs $14,000. The monitor that treats you is $40,000. The air tanks that you put on are $10,000. So when these guys need help, when they're asking for a tax increase, or they're asking you to do a fundraiser, you need to think to yourself, oh, I don't want to pay a tax today, but it might come to haunt you tomorrow. So whatever you can do to help fund it. And if you think they're mismanaging money, join the board. Most tax bases have a board. They always want community input. Be an active part of how your community chooses to professionally respond to things.
Nick, thank you so much for your expertise and for visiting with us today. This has been very informative, very enlightening, and very refreshing to see the level of commitment on the part of you and those first responders to take care of us. We so much appreciate it. And now for our audience, what are you going to do based on this discussion with Nick? What steps can you take today or start working on to make sure that you are part of the solution and that your experience with whatever may come will be positive? Comment below. And thanks for being part of the solution.
And I could recommend, from what he said, carbon monoxide detectors, smoke detectors, fire extinguishers, right? All that good stuff, working order and practiced.